Hello all, this is the fourth part of our Globalists in Parliament series, and it's in response to viewer requests. Some people have asked why I've only so far focused on the Conservative Party globalists. Well, the simple answer is because they are in government and so more powerful than their shadow opposites. They are the ones showing up on the world stage and so-called representing us. So while I primarily focus on government ministers for this series, there is one member of the opposition whom you repeatedly asked me to do a deep dive on, and that is leader of the Labour Party and leader of the so-called opposition, Sir Keir Starmer. Let me be clear here. The UK has no real political opposition. Sir Keir Starmer, knighted by the then Prince Charles in 2014, is as establishment and globalist as it gets. Starmer has earned his place in the series over a period of time, really, but it's in the last few days where he has jumped up and metaphorically slapped me around the face and insisted that he make his way into our Globalist in Parliament series. But first, some background. Keir Rodney Starmer is a British politician. He's a barrister. He's served as the leader of the Labour Party since 2020. He's been a member of Parliament since 2015 when he was elected into the seat of Holborn and St Pancras in London. He was previously Director of Public Prosecutions from 2008 to 2013, more of which later. He was born in London. He was raised in Surrey, where he attended the selective state Reigate Grammar School, which became a private school while he was still a student. He graduated with a Bachelor of Law degree from the University of Leeds in 1985 and gained a postgraduate Bachelor of Civil Law degree at the University of Oxford in 1986. As a lawyer, Starmer practiced predominantly in criminal defence work, specialising in human rights matters. He was appointed as Queen's Counsel, QC, in 2002. In 2008, he became Director of Public Prosecutions, the DPP, and head of the Crown Prosecution Service, holding these positions until 2013. Following in such notable footsteps as Sir Alan Green, who was once caught curb crawling in the red light district of King's Cross in London. After his 5-year term as DPP, he was appointed Knight Commander of the Order of the Bath in the 2014 New Year's Honours List. When he was elected to the House of Commons, Starmer was appointed Shadow Minister for Immigration by the then new party leader Jeremy Corbyn in September 2015. He resigned in 2016 in protest at Corbyn's leadership, but accepted a new post under Corbyn later that year as Shadow Secretary of State for exiting the European Union following the EU membership referendum. Some more personal information about him. Well, he is a Fabian Society member. I don't know if you are familiar with the Fabian Society. The official description of the Fabian Society is it's a British socialist organisation whose purpose is to advance the principles of social democracy and democratic socialism. It's actually one of the oldest, if not the oldest, political think tank in the UK. Its coat of arms is a wolf in sheep's clothing, although I think they've generally phased that out these days because there's only so much in plain sight that any of these groups can cope with. He's also, of course, a huge World Economic Forum supporter who was asked which he preferred, Westminster or Davos, which is obviously is where the WEF meetings are held, and he couldn't contain himself and he said Davos. So he was in Davos this year promoting Labour's green policies. That's green as in climate, blah, 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 as opposed to green as in bile, which is, of course, far more appropriate. So back to present day and why he's rocked up as our fourth globalist in Parliament. First of all, this past weekend, he was in the Telegraph, the newspaper that is considered the house paper for Tory members, and he was bigging up Margaret Thatcher in a self-penned editorial headlined, "Voters have been betrayed on Brexit and immigration. I stand ready to deliver," which is fairly ironic given that as a human rights barrister, he was responsible for multiple cases to do with immigration, and some could argue that Starmer has played a significant role in the issue of mass immigration over the last 2 decades. But let's not allow facts or the truth to get in the way of a stomping good editorial in the Tories' newspaper of choice. So in this editorial, as I say, he praised Margaret Thatcher as one of 3 key change makers in modern British political history, alongside Tony Blair and Clement Attlee. He said that they realised that politics must act in service of the British people rather than dictating to them. He followed the editorial piece with an appearance on BBC Radio 4 saying that Thatcher had a mission and a driving sense of purpose. He argued that our country had drifted and declined during the past 13 years of Conservative-led rule. And he was asked if he was seeking Tory votes, and he replied, "Yes, I do want to persuade those that voted Tory in the past to vote Labour this time around." Well, of course, the way you get a Tory voter to vote for Tories is you become even more Tory than the Tories, right? And yes, in terms of a driving sense of purpose, Margaret Thatcher absolutely had one in ensuring that her pedo mates such as Jimmy Savile and Sir Peter Morrison were decently protected. As an aside, I actually protested outside Thatcher's funeral, proudly so. I was deeply aggrieved that taxpayers were footing a multi-million pound funeral for one of the most divisive and abhorrent leaders in our history, including her clear love for child abusers. And so Starmer has made himself absolutely clear, if he hadn't already, and that is he has declared his respect of Thatcher, and in a newspaper run by Tory billionaires. Who'd have thunk it, eh? Starmer will do anything to get elected. It's important to note that. This is yet another classic example of him saying what he thinks people want to hear. Now, he's not alone in that. David Cameron has really sort of perfected the art of that. And Starmer is another Cameron. And what is interesting is in a socialist magazine in the 1980s, he described Thatcherism as an authoritarian onslaught. How times change when you're a globalist in Parliament. And yesterday, when he was speaking at the Economy 2030 conference, he made clear that under Labour, the ideological harm that is austerity is set to continue. So let's be clear here, if you were in any doubt. What Starmer represents is about more power for the rich and privileged and less power for people like us. And it is interesting, the title of that conference, by the way, note 2030. And don't forget, in 2030, that is also the United Nations Sustainable Development Date, where they intend to achieve all their 17 goals. Please, if you haven't yet looked into what those goals are, I urge you to, because it will explain so much of what we are experiencing. So what was really amusing, for want of a better description, was he was talking about public finances and money being too tight to mention for many people. And when he gets into office, he's going to make sure that we have decent public accountability. And he chose to tell a story about his sister. And he said that, when he would say to his sister, let's go to the pub, she says in return, I'll bring my own sandwiches. This I find quite extraordinary. I can't get my head around it. What kind of family does he come from where his sister thinks her millionaire brother won't cover a pub lunch? The fact is, he tells any story, any dodgy anecdote that he can to play to whatever audience he is speaking to at any time. I find him deeply untrustworthy. So he says we're in a financial hole. We need to get out of it. They always tell us we're in debt and that we owe billions, even trillions of pounds. But I want to know, to whom do we owe this money? Because nobody's ever really given me a decent answer. The fact remains that Starmer will do and say whatever is required to become Prime Minister. You cannot trust a person like that. I refer to the Malcolm X quote, which said, a man who stands for nothing will fall for anything. And he certainly does. And so he used that anecdote about his sister to trade on his working class background, but it really wasn't as impoverished as he likes to make out. His father, Rodney Starmer, was a toolmaker and his mother was a nurse. In light of their manipulated cost of living crisis, he spoke to the BBC explaining that he understood the financial plight suffered by many families despite his multi-million pound net worth. He shared another anecdote about his family, saying, I actually do know what it is like to sit around the kitchen table not being able to pay your bills. And he noted that the family's phone lines were cut off for months at a time as they, in quotes, got to a point where we couldn't pay for the utilities. They had a phone. Where I come from, that was rich, right? We had a black and white TV, which you put coins into work, and my brother would break into it before the poor man would come and collect it, and we'd use that money to feed us. And what was great was that the TV man was always really good about it. And he always fixed it. The TV man was on our side, and he fixed it so it didn't show that we were breaking into the TV to take the money. And I can dig that. That's a Robin Hood move as far as I'm concerned. And, and about Starmer's wealth, in a 2020 article in the Mail on Sunday, and this is just after he'd become leader of the Labour Party, they reported that he owned 7 acres of land in Surrey worth up to £10 million. And the newspaper said that he had acquired the property on Greenbelt next to the Surrey home where he grew up. And it was during 1996 while he was working as a human rights lawyer. There's a lot of money in being a lawyer, right? We know that. He's often played down his wealth. And during the Leader Labourship campaign, he said, I'm not a millionaire, although he did later concede that the London house he shares with his wife, Victoria Starmer, might be worth 1 million. And also bear in mind that as the DPP, that comes with a hefty salary. And so these days, on top of the wealth that he already has from his days as a lawyer, he earns the MP salary plus leader of the opposition. And his earnings in 2021-2022 included more than £85,000 in capital gains from the sale of a home that he had bought with his sister. Would that be the same sister who claims to be taking sandwiches to the pub? The fact is that people like Starmer, they love to use the idea that they come from working class stock, right? But we've seen that. Labour is full of people who talk like that. I came from working class. The fact is, Keir Starmer is really just another Tony Blair. That's what he is. And I love this poster that went up in Scotland last week, courtesy of the Alba Party. Look at that. And it's brilliant, isn't it? It's based on Scooby-Doo. And obviously it shows the mask being revealed that, he's just the same as Tony Blair, because that is the reality. The thing about Starmer, as I say, is he will adapt to any condition that is required of him in order to become the Premier. He will switch and change and delete. In fact, UK Labour has removed 10 pledges that Starmer made, and those have now been deleted from their official website. Oh, look, there's the notice telling us that it's gone. And in case you want to see what they were, it was based on the moral case for socialism. And obviously, we now know he is neither. And those pledges included economic justice, social justice, promote peace and human rights, common ownership based on public services should be in public hands, strengthen workers' rights and trade union, and effective, this is my favourite, number 10, effective opposition to the Tories. Let me read this to you. It's so funny. It's only sort of funny in a oh, does he think he can pull this one off kind of way. And it says, forensic effective opposition to the Tories in Parliament linked up to our mass membership and a professional election operation. Never lost sight of the votes lent to the Tories in 2019. Unite our party, promote pluralism and improve our culture. Robust action to eradicate the scourge of anti-Semitism. Maintain our collective link with the unions. So, did you hear that word, anti-Semitism, which is another reason why Sir Keir Starmer is our globalist in Parliament? He is, of course, a proud Zionist, big supporter of Israel, Labour friends of Israel, just all the usual stuff that you have now come to absolutely expect in this series. And he replaced Corbyn. And I had issues with Corbyn. I was involved in an article for the Mail on Sunday in which there was a secret Labour group on Facebook, which included Wes Streeting, and women such as myself were being doxed for opposing the idea that men could become women. And so I was involved in this article, Mail on Sunday, and on the day it was published, Jeremy Corbyn was on the Andrew Marr show on the BBC, and Andrew Marr actually read out part of our article to him and said, are you prepared to meet women about this? And Jeremy Corbyn said, absolutely. Did he? Did he? No, he didn't. In fact, Labour have been far worse than the Tories for the whole gender madness. And don't get it twisted, as the kids like to say, because the truth is that while I believe that they are also incredibly similar and you won't ever get anything different, whoever you vote in, they have to have nuances. Otherwise, how can they fool their voting public? So Tories now are like, we're anti this gender madness, we're anti woke, whereas Labour are, apparently completely woke. And I mean, I think at this moment in time, Eddie Izzard is standing for a place in Brighton, and that's, Eddie Izzard, the one who likes to switch into girl mode when it suits him. But of course, he stays in boy mode when there are TV parts that require filling. I digress. So Starmer replaced Corbyn as the UK Labour leader. At the time, he apologised to Jews for what he claimed was anti-Semitism in the ranks, and he vowed to tear out the poison. And so, yes, of course, I said this in the last video and maybe in the others. I'm really not convinced that you can be a globalist without being a Zionist. And, just to refer back to Starmer's role as the director of public prosecutions, the DPP, he has been subjected to much derision for that role and the failure to prosecute Jimmy Savile while heading up the CPS. So let's look at that, shall we? Many people have claimed that Starmer stopped prosecutions against Jimmy Savile. Now, this was repeated in Parliament. He has, of course, denied it. And the reality is that, yes, indeed, Keir Starmer did lead the CPS when it did not charge Jimmy Savile. He wasn't the reviewing lawyer. He was the big boss, the overseeing big boss. But I keep thinking that somebody as famous as Jimmy Savile, how did the big boss not know that this man was being reported to police all around the country? Anyway, I digress. The allegations against Savile were dealt with by local police and a reviewing lawyer for the CPS. A later investigation criticised the actions of both the CPS and the police in the handling of the Savile situation. It did not suggest that Keir Starmer was personally involved in the decisions made. And the Labour Party have consistently refused to comment on individual cases and the CPS, and said that records relating to the decision not to charge Savile were not kept, which the service said is in line with its data retention policy. Starmer later commissioned an official investigation into the matter, which criticised both prosecutors and police for their handling of the allegations. So that's all right then. In 2013, the DPP were forced to issue a statement, and I'm going to read you some of it. In May 2007, a complaint was made to Surrey Police alleging that in the late 1970s, Jimmy Savile had sexually assaulted a girl aged about 14 or 15 at Duncroft Children's Home. The allegation was investigated by Surrey Police. In the course of that investigation, 2 further allegations came to light. First, that in about 1973, Jimmy Savile had assaulted a girl aged about 14 outside Stoke Mandeville Hospital. Secondly, that in the 1970s, Jimmy Savile had suggested to a girl who was probably aged about 17 in Duncroft Children's Home that she perform a certain act on him. Now, there's much more to this, obviously. There were police forces all around the UK who were informed about Jimmy Savile. But when you've got a weekly breakfast club at your home for the local police, which Jimmy Savile did, there's not a lot of hope that you're going to be prosecuted, all right? Because one of the things that Savile said was, if I go down, they're going down with me. Jimmy Savile quote. In October 2012, in light of the more recent allegations of Savile's offending, QC Alison Levitt was asked to examine the decisions by the CPS in relation to the 4 allegations made in 2007 and 2008. Actually, the report is damning. It is absolutely damning. Although it starts off by saying, this is the caveat that it starts off with, there is nothing to suggest that the decisions not to prosecute were consciously influenced by any improper motive on the part of either the police or prosecutors. However, despite the fact that, looked at objectively, there was nothing to suggest that the complainants had colluded in their accounts, nor that they were in any way inherently less reliable than complainants in other cases, the police and prosecutors treated them and the accounts they gave with a degree of caution which was neither justified nor required. This manifested itself in different ways. Surrey Police decided not to tell each complainant that other complaints had been made. Sussex Police told the complainant that corroboration would be needed. For his part, the CPS prosecutor, when told by police that the complainants did not support the prosecution, did not probe this or seek to build a prosecution. And it goes on to say that Ms. Levitt, QC, concluded that although there are a number of imponderables, had the police and prosecutors taken a different approach, a prosecution might have been possible in relation to 3 of the 4 allegations. Instead, they allowed Savile, like all the other establishment abusers, to die off without accountability. But as I say, Keir Starmer commissioned a report and that's it, right? Time to move on, folks. So what else? The thing about Keir Starmer is I was going to sort of subtitle this Any Way the Wind Blows, because that is who he is. Do you remember when he took a knee for the Black Lives Matter movement? Now, we all know that people have been fleeced worldwide to fatten the bank accounts of organisers. It was not what it was ever supposed to be. But the thing with Keir Starmer is that's the kind of man he is, right? He'll take a knee, just as he will say ludicrous stuff about gender identity, anything to appeal to whomever he's talking to or attempting to appeal to at this moment in time. But bear in mind, he's now promoting Thatcher, so I'm sure that the kind of the wokerati are less than impressed with him these days. So what else to say about him? Oh, obviously, massive COVID enforcer, both for the jibs and lockdown and everything else that accompanied it. Yet despite this, he was accused of breaking lockdown rules alongside his reprehensible deputy Angela Rayner, who believes that men can become women. During lockdown, as I say, they were accused of breaking lockdown rules. You'll be shocked to know that both Starmer and Rayner were cleared by Durham Police following an investigation. It's amazing what a good handshake can do in some situations. I should say, truly, I don't care about whether they did or didn't break lockdown rules. What I opposed was the fact that they enforced that nonsense on the rest of us. Do you know why they felt able to mix when the rest of us weren't, because they knew there was nothing to worry about. This is the reality. All of these politicians who were not breaking lockdown rules had no fear for their health. So the irony, of course, is you have all these people online who they're fighting to get the upper hand for Tories, or fighting to get the upper hand for Labour, to want to replace one globalist in Parliament with another. What we need is a completely different system, and Keir Starmer does not offer that. So Keir Starmer is our fourth globalist in Parliament, a man who has more faces than Big Ben and will present whichever one you like. You cannot trust a politician who does that. Put your faith in him at your peril. And I want to thank my wonderful patrons at Patreon for making this video possible, including my Patreon producers, Paul Jackson and Sean Deodat. There is a link in the description below to my Patreon. Support if you can, but please note, do not create any hardship for yourself by doing so. There are a multitude of ways to support my work, including watching, sharing, liking and subscribing. I want to thank you all for your incredible support regarding this series. Please keep on sharing it. There are more of us than them. Please remember that.